My name is Connie Bolin. I'm the founder. This was my crazy idea that we could put airplanes and people together and you guys would show up to enjoy them. For 20 years, that has worked, and I am very proud to be the founder and coordinator for Warbirds in Review with a really terrific backup crew that helps. My job now is to say thank you to Scott's Miracle-Gro Company, our sustaining sponsor. We could not have the funds that make this possible if it weren't for Jim Hagedorn and the Scott's Miracle-Gro Company. We, on our own, Warbirds in Review, provide the nice bleachers for you to sit out in the sunshine and the jumbotrons. And Sleeping Dog Productions is the very talented production team that records this for us, and that is one of our main missions, is to record the people who make these airplanes available to us and the veterans who flew them. We record their history so it will not be lost, and we're going to have a little bit of interference here. The sound of a P-51, so how much better does it get than that, right? So I'll give them a second to get parked here. That's the Old Crow and the Gentleman Jim airplanes. They were featured here yesterday. Some of you might have seen that. They've been out flying, having a good time this morning, and that's what should happen. You can go to a museum and you can see these airplanes, but you can't hear them run like that. So now back to our Vietnam Day feature. We have the Birddog here, and in just a few minutes we're going to have some very distinguished Vietnam veterans out here to tell you about the airplanes, and the owners will be available also. We, in the years past, have had David Hartman, Good Morning America host, has been our moderator, and several years ago, Ron and Diane Fagan presented us with this very nice building here, which gives us a green room, production room, very nice facility. So we thank all the people that make this possible, the volunteers that make this possible. And today, not to take the place of David Hartman, but we're very pleased to have Brigadier General Ed McElhenney, retired Brigadier General, step in as our moderator. So he's visiting with the Vietnam people in the green room right now. We'll be bringing them out very shortly. And as a lead-in, this intro has been written by David Hartman, produced by Sleeping Dog Productions. So I'll direct you to the Jumbotron now for that video, and then General McElhenney will be out with the guest. Thank you.
I'm a forward air controller, a fact, an Air Force pilot assigned to brigade. This particular mission was pre-planned, requested by the Army's 3rd Brigade a day in advance. The objective was to find and destroy base camps on an east-west BC supply route in the area around Lai Key, about 50 miles from Saigon.
The forward air controller was specifically organized, trained, and equipped to be that link between air operations and ground operations. And when I say ground operations, I mean in all of its various forms. And when we were coordinating, working with our fighter aircraft and our gunship support aircraft to come in and support us, we had to be able to show them the target. And the way we did that was very simply by firing a smoke rocket down there to the ground near the target and then talking them into the target using that technique. Hit my smoke was the classic call.
Vietnam is a sliver, a ribbon of a country on the South China Sea. It's bordered by China, Laos, and Cambodia. Until 1954, it was part of French Indochina. That's when Ho Chi Minh, the communist and nationalist leader, defeated the French and sent them packing back to France. Ho Chi Minh then looked to unify the country under his rule. A Geneva Convention agreement put a hold on that and split the country in two, similar to what had happened just a year earlier in Korea. The split was supposed to be temporary, but a planned election never happened. The North stayed communist, while the South, backed by the United States, wanted democracy. In the late 1950s, President Eisenhower started sending military advisors to help the South defend itself. President Kennedy continued to send in more troops, and by 1963, 16,000 American fighters were in South Vietnam. In early August 1964, 2 North Vietnamese attacks on U.S. ships in the Tonkin Gulf were reported. The second attack never happened, but President Johnson used the report to get broad military powers for himself to expand America's combat role in Vietnam. By the end of 1965, almost 200,000 American troops were in the South. By 1969, the total had jumped to 543,000.
Darrel Whitcomb, one-time Raven 25 and Neal 25, a 1969 graduate of the Air Force Academy, served our country for over 30 years as a United States Air Force pilot, staff officer, and historian. He served 3 tours in Southeast Asia as a cargo pilot and forward air controller, logging 2,000 combat missions over Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. Darrel was awarded a Silver Star and 2 Distinguished Flying Crosses for his service. He is an avid writer of aviation, military, rescue, and personal recovery history, with over 70 articles appearing in a variety of journals and magazines.
Good evening.
Take your seats. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks for being here. We really appreciate your attendance. I'm Ed McElhenney, as Connie introduced me. I'm kind of filling in, and I'm going to be the guy that steers the ship, if you will. I'm just the moderator. The guy to my immediate left is the star of this show, and you just saw who that guy was here just a couple seconds ago. The other gentleman we have, and that's Darrel Whitcomb, by the way. The other gentlemen that we have here are the owners of these 2 beautiful airplanes. And I made the comment when I first got here. I said, these are way too clean. And I think it was Mike who sat there and said, yeah. He said, and every time a veteran comes up here, he says, yeah, I've never flown one this clean. But we've got Jim Rohlf and Mike Weinfurter. They're the owners of these 2 planes, and they're going to be the local experts, if you will, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But the program is going to be basically, you've seen the introduction. As I said, Darrel is going to be the star of the show here. Those are the 2 local experts, and then at the very tail end, this is a Vietnam day. But also, it's a special ops day, because that's what we're talking about here specifically. Specifically, we're talking about Ravens. And Darrel will get into exactly what those guys are here in a few minutes. But they're special ops. And we're very fortunate to have a very young colonel sitting out in front here, Nate Scopak, who is, Darrel and myself are both retired. That guy is not. He soon will be. But he is current down at Hurlburt Field now, and he's our special ops expert at this point. And probably for the last 10 minutes or so, he's going to be given a little bit of a briefing with slides on current day special ops. So we're very fortunate to have that. So that's going to be the lay of the land. That's how we're probably going to get things rolling here. But the first thing I'd like to do, again, from a Vietnam standpoint, I'm going to first ask if there are any Vietnam veterans out in the audience. If there are, please stand.
Hoorah! Hoorah!
I'll go beyond that and say, are there any family members whose mother, father, brother, sister, are there any of those types who are there? Again, please stand. We'd like to say thank you for supporting those people. And finally, all veterans, any veterans that served, Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines, Coast Guard, you name it, please rise, and I'm here to say thank you very much for your service.
Hoorah.
Outstanding. I'm going to begin this. You saw the introduction up there, but the star of our show, as I said, is Darrel Whitcomb, and that's Colonel retired Darrel Whitcomb. And I didn't have this memorized, but I'm going to read it here. The President of the United States of America, authorized by Act of Congress, July 9, 1918, takes pleasure in presenting the Silver Star to Darrel D. Whitcomb, United States Air Force, for conspicuous gallantry and intrepidity in action against the enemy in Southeast Asia. His gallant actions and dedicated devotion to duty, without regard for his own life, were in keeping with the highest traditions of military service and reflect great credit upon himself, his unit, and the United States Air Force. That's who's standing up here right now, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Darrel.
Thank you, sir.
All right, so we've thanked all those who have served, and now we're going to get into the details of this program. And the details, as I said, is the Raven program. I'm not an expert. I was at the tail end of Vietnam. They never sent me over there. I was a forward air controller, and I shot a lot of rockets, but never in anger per se. So with that, I'm going to say, Colonel retired Darrel, you've got the floor, and he's also got some slides that he's going to be showing. So, and at the very end, I'll just warn you right now, we'll have some time to ask questions, not only of Darrel, but of Jim and of Mike and of Nate over there. So we'll have some time then also. So, Darrel, you've got it.
Thank you, sir.
You're welcome.
It's a pleasure to be here with you all today. Alibis up front, I have to admit, this is my first Oshkosh. That's terrible, considering I spent 37 years as a professional pilot, doing all kinds of professional things with airplanes. And this is my first visit, but I guarantee you it won't be my last. But I'm really quite blown away by all of it. And all of you who are here to celebrate this. This is really a celebration. It's not an air show. It's a celebration of aviation. And to me, the message is, this is America. This represents our nation. We are an aeronautical nation. Aviation is part of our bloodstream. It's our DNA. It's our culture. It's who we are. And just think about it right now. The sky is full of people going here, there, yon, freighters, everybody doing their thing. It's very much a part of how we live our lives today. And it's astounding to be here. I understand there are almost 9,000 airplanes here now. Imagine that. 9,000 privately owned airplanes. There's groups of airplanes down there. I can't even tell you what kind they are. I've never seen them before. And there's bunches of them. It's great stuff. And I'm glad to be here, proud to be here. And I'm especially proud to be here with two fellow Air Force Academy graduates. I'm a class of 69, so I'm a really old guy. Ed, class of 74. Nate, class of 97. He's still serving, still doing his thing. But you notice how over the years, the guys have just gotten better and better looking. How does that work? Okay, let's go back to 1972. I'm a young Air Force captain. I'm flying in Southeast Asia, Vietnam, flying the OV-10. I find out we have this program over in Laos called the Raven program. What's that all about? I've got a map of their Southeast Asia. It's kind of hard to see. I have to stand up myself to see it. But you notice when Ed was gracious enough to read my citation, it never mentioned what country I was in, did it? Never mentioned where I was. And that's because during the Vietnam War, we deployed a total of about 2.5 million young men and women to go over and fight that war. Most of the fighting took place in the country of South Vietnam, but that was only part of the story. The enemy that we were fighting, the North Vietnamese, and they were the true enemy, the Viet Cong were one of their tools, they were fighting throughout Southeast Asia. The war in Laos, the war in Cambodia, it was all designed to do two things. Reunite Vietnam under communist control. That was why we were fighting in Vietnam. But the larger war that was going on had to do with the North Vietnamese desire. They wanted to establish hegemony over the entire region there. So they were sending their forces into Laos and into Cambodia. Thailand was involved. And we were fighting them in all of those places, but we just didn't know, the people didn't know about it because it was, quote, the secret war. And why was it secret? Because in 1962, when President Kennedy first tried to deal with the issue of Vietnam, the answer was diplomacy. We got a bunch of politicians together, and they declared that Laos would be a neutral country. Solve that problem, right? And there would be no military troops in there, nothing like that. Well, guess what happened? As soon as they signed the treaty, the North Vietnamese started moving into Laos wholesale. We had pulled our forces out of there, but we had to oppose them. So we started building up the Laotian forces, our allies, and to tie their ground power together, we needed to tie our air power together with them. That required forward air controllers, like me, okay? But since we didn't have any military allowed in Laos, we had to bring these guys in as civilians. Covert operation at the time. And they were doing the same thing in Laos that they were doing in Southeast Asia, in Vietnam and in Cambodia. That is the sound of freedom. And the enemy was in these places, and we had to fight them there. And that's what we did. And later on, in 1970, we sent our army into Cambodia. We were widening the war. No, we weren't widening the war. That's where the war was, man. And you got to go where the enemy is. And the same thing in Laos, the North Vietnamese were trying to do two things. In the north, they were trying to come down from the top and take over the Laotian government. In the south, they were using southern Laos. If you look at southern Laos, it's right in the middle of the entire area. It is the strategic terrain of that theater there. They were using that as their conduit to bring their supplies into the south, the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And we had to destroy that, and we tried to use air power to do that. And we would use our forward air controllers to direct those fighters too. During the war in Southeast Asia, we sent hundreds of thousands of our fine soldiers and Marines, our grunts, to fight that ground war. And we were in there using our air power to defend them and help them win their battles. That air power was Navy coming in off of the carriers. It was from our Air Force bases. We had 6 of them. I'd rather be up there. We were bringing in, we had our Air Force fighter bombers and all those aircraft up there supporting us. And of course, all of our military branches, the Marines and the Army, have big aviation branches that were there to support our troops. And every day, that's what we were doing. And we knew that if we could get up on the Ho Chi Minh Trail or up in northern Laos where those forces were coming through and destroy them, that meant our grunts in the south didn't have to fight them. And that was the value of that air power. And I served over there from about September of 1972 to February of 1973 when they declared ceasefire in Laos, and we were then stopped operating. We were limited to flying 120 hours a month, which meant that when you hit 120 hours for that month, you stopped logging time. Because the war didn't stop. The fighting didn't stop. Our friendlies needed us, and we would go out and do that. So that's the big picture. That's why we call it the secret war, and that's why I say to you, when people ask me, what did you do in Vietnam? And I said, well, really, I served in Southeast Asia because I was in Laos, Cambodia, Thailand, a little bit, a couple of times illegally in North Vietnam, because that's where our war was. And one of the weapons, one of the most ubiquitous and iconic weapons that we used in that war were these little aircraft right here, little O-1s. Now, you can go down on that ramp over there, and you can see all those fancy esoteric jets and all kinds of very sophisticated machines and everything, and that's all really great. But this is air power, too. And what we do with these little bitty airplanes here, they don't look like much. And I got to tell you, when I checked out in the O-1, it's very simple to fly, except for one thing. It's got that funny little wheel in the tail. And up to that time, I had flown nothing but tricycle gear, right? So when I check out in the O-1,
basically it's a 2-day process, but the requirement is I had to get 100 landings. And every landing required a taxi back. And I said, you got to be shitting me. What are you doing? He said, you just wait. And the whole idea was I had to learn how to land an airplane like this with a tail wheel. It's a different process. And yes, I've ground looped. I've been there, okay? Fortunately, I didn't hurt anybody or anything. But so that's what I did over there as a Raven. And I've got some slides I'd like to show you that'll highlight some of our particular missions, but I think we're going to switch subjects now and talk about the airplanes, okay? So
Yep.
let's do that, Ed.
Yep, we've got Mike and Jim here who are going to talk. These are their airplanes, and as I said, they're absolutely spotless. They got a couple simulated rockets on the wings, and Darrel will probably talk about that. But with that, I'll turn it over to who wants to go first? Jim, Mike, your call.
Yeah.
All right.
Just turned on.
Jim's got it, and he can talk about the airplanes and fill you in.
Yeah, I don't have as much to talk about. Mike can tell you more about the airplane. I just wanted to say that I didn't realize what was going on. You know, I graduated from high school in 1974. The war was pretty well over. And we heard about this secret war thing going on and really didn't understand until I got involved in the Warbird program a little bit. We bought a T-28. And one of the things that they first done when I got involved with the group was go to the Hmong convention, which were the people that we supported in Laos. And I didn't know anything about that. And after meeting those people and hearing the story, I became more interested in the secret war of Southeast Asia. So our mission, and when I say that, is with the Aviation Heritage Foundation in Eastern Iowa, is we're trying to put together a collection of operating aircraft that tells the story of these guys and what they've done in the secret war. I don't think that's been told enough, and we want to keep the aircraft flying and tell the story, and also the people that were allied with us in Southeast Asia at that time. Because as Darrel mentioned, when I researched it, I found too that there was a lot of fighting going on that we haven't talked about, and I think the story needs to be told while these guys are still with us. So thank you for letting us bring the airplane, and I'm interested to hear Darrel's story, and I've read a lot of his books and a lot of the other veterans' books that were over there too, so trying to get the story correct. So,
Mike, you got it.
Thanks, Jim. Well, I'm the somewhat historian, per se, for this event regarding and tell you a little bit about the airplanes. Don't worry, I won't put you all to sleep, but I hope to keep you awake. 49, the Army came up with a new contract. They wanted something to replace the aging, quickly World War II liaison aircraft. That's about all they had left. So, put out a contract. 5 companies went after it, including Cessna. They won the contract with the Birddog. Started building them late 1950s, sending them out to Army units in Korea, training bases here in the States. Of course, they continued with them. Vietnam starts firing up, and that was their next combat assignment, was Vietnam. The two we have here today, mine is the orange one here. Both are A models, by the way. And mine represents Army participation and use of the airplane in the 50s. It's in its original all-orange colors. Out of a little over 3,400 built in 11 years, roughly 600 to 700 left the factory this color. Go figure. And they went to training bases. The other aircraft, Jim's here, is painted to represent the Air Force Oscar 1s used during the Vietnam conflict and a few name-bragging places. And both are equipped with replica rockets. Mine is a trainer. This is the first aircraft they learned to fire them with. And the people assigned overseas, when they got into Vietnam, it was the real thing. They could carry up to 8 of the rockets, but they're going so darn slow and heavy with that many, they took 4 of them off. So how it goes. Fantastic airplane to fly. Easy to fly. Yes, it's a tail dragger. It's a little bit more demanding than some, but a real sweetheart. It's often been called, whether it's been with Marines, Army, Air Force, whomever, most feared aircraft in the military inventory. people flying these had an awful lot of friends with a lot of firepower.
Mike, how about gross weight?
Oh, they ran anywhere from 21 to 2,800 pounds gross, although I've heard a lot of stories of them going out on missions in Southeast Asia, 3,200 pounds, all on 213 horsepower. Or if you're lucky enough, had one of the few constant speed bird dogs, you had a whopping 225. Oh my God. So a lot was asked of them.
What kind of range? How long can they fly?
You're good for right around 4 hours range with a small reserve.
Okay. All right. We're tight on time, so thank you very much for the synopsis, and I'll turn it back over to Darrel.
Okay, now let's talk about using the O-1 as a weapon of war. Okay? Simple airplane to fly. I wasn't using that airplane to fly. I was using that airplane to get myself up to where I needed to be to help the battle that I was involved in. You can see the rocket rails on each of the wings there. These warheads over here are anti-armor. Again, if you're going against hard targets like tanks. Over here, these are smoke rockets. Need to mark a target on the ground. We had another warhead called a flechette. When you would fire that, it would break it open. It had about 1,000 little nails in it. Very effective against troops on the ground, okay? But how did we employ this aircraft? Normally, as Mike said, about 4 hours worth of gas. So I would take off. The fuel gauges were notoriously inaccurate, so I'd keep my own time hack. I'd fly left wing for an hour, right wing for an hour, left wing for a half hour, right wing for a half hour, and about that time, unless I'm really in the middle of a serious situation, I'm looking for gas, okay? Where could I find gas? All over northern Laos when I was working there, and this little airplane will land just about anywhere, okay? I put it on 10,000-foot asphalt concrete runways. I put it on roads that were 10 feet wide. You go where you need to go. In fact, I think I've got okay. Hold off on that slide. Now go back to the previous one, please, Scott. There you go. The area that I flew in was called the Plain of Jars in northern Laos, and that's a composite photograph that I took when I was over there one day. You can see the rails of my airplane there. The Plain of Jars was a very high plateau strategic area, constantly fought out during the war. They called it the Plain of Jars. We call it the Valley of Death, and for good reasons. But when I would fly this airplane, I'd get in, I'd have a bag of maps. I probably had more maps than you could cover that whole screen with, because I had to be able to use military maps. I had to be able to use aviation maps to be able to coordinate to bring in my fast mover aircraft to hit targets down below. The key item that I used to do that, of course, was my radios. That allowed me to talk to my airplanes, my air traffic control on VHF, or my Fox mic to talk to my ground forces. And a lot of times when I would fly, I would have a translator in the back seat, usually a Hmong tribesman who could talk to the folks on the ground. I never forget one day I'm working a target, and I asked my backseater, I said, now I need to know, are those friendly troops down there? And he gets involved in about a 20-minute conversation. Finally I asked him, and I said, what's the answer? The guy said yes. Okay. we'll do our thing here. But when you get into the airplane, and I'm sure all of you pilots realize this, when you've flown an airplane a lot, you really know how to feel the airplane. It becomes part of you. I remember one time General Chappie James was talking to us about flying in Southeast Asia, and some reporter said, gee, General, you're a pretty big guy. Is it hard to get into the F-4? And he looked at him and he says, I don't get into the F-4, I put it on. And that's right. When you get in an airplane like that, and you pilots know this, you feel comfortable with the machine, you know how to make it work, you know what the right sounds are, the right vibrations, and when something changes, like when you're over the middle of a lake, you go, oh, gee, what was that? You know, it's the same thing with the O-1. We got to the point in the O-1 where flying it was secondary to using it for what we were doing. And that little O-1 was an extension of me, okay? It took me up into the sky so I could see further and wider around me. It gave me the radio so I could talk to people long ways away. And then when I wanted to identify a target on the ground, I'd roll that steely-eyed beast in there and fire a rocket down there, and there it is. So that airplane was literally an extension of me as I'm trying to conduct my missions. the base that we used over in Laos, up there in the north there, a place called Long Chin. Kind of Steve Canyon-esque, kind of Sneaky Pete. Yeah, there were times when that was the busiest airport in the world. Why? Because we had Air America pukes coming in and out of there. We had Air Force A1 guys diverting in there because 2 of their jugs blew off, and we had Laotian forces in there because everybody was flying O1s then. By this time of the war, all of the U.S. conventional O1s are gone. The last O1s we're flying are the Ravens up in Laos. And that was because of the fact that as the war developed, the North Vietnamese brought down more guns, more missiles and stuff, and it was just too dangerous in most areas for us to use O1, so we went to the O2, we went to the OV-10, but in the Raven program, we continued to fly the O1 because we're involved in a secret war, and we have got to be able to hide within the interior of our allied forces, and so when we were up there, we were flying Laotian O1s with their markings on them. Or sometimes we would change the markings out, and I'll show you a picture of that in just a second. But that's what we had to do. So the O1, though, for what we were doing, was perfectly adapted for our missions. And I might add, too, it's actually a very sensual airplane to fly. Why? Because when I was flying in my OV-10, I'm in a sterile cockpit. It's closed. It's tightened. I can hear the airplane. I can see what's going on, and I can talk on the radios. But I really don't have much more of what's going on down there. But in the O1, I would fly along with the windows open. And man, when you got the windows open, all of a sudden, you can hear a lot more things like large caliber bullets going by your airplane. They go whoosh, whoosh, as they go by. You can hear the ping when rifle shells would hit your airplane. Ping, ping. You hear that. It's very, very noticeable. It gets your attention. Plus, up there, you can smell things. And when you're in the middle of a heavy engagement and there's a lot of stuff going on and you're bringing in a lot of heavy type ordnance, the different weapons as they explode have different smells. And you can, it helps your whole sensual surrounding and you're totally into the moment. Plus, you can literally taste the airplane when you're in it and all of the feels that are accompanied by just the movement of the airplane and the generators and all that kind of stuff. And like I say, it was the most sensual airplane I ever flew in my whole time over there. Okay, next slide, please. See what we got. Okay, here's one of my O1. Whoops, go back one. Sorry. There we go. Here's one of our forward airstrips. It's just a dirt runway out there, and we had a lot of those. And a lot of times we would need to drop in for gas or maybe to rearm. Sometimes we would need to go somewhere and talk to a specific commander about an operation, and that's how we would get to him. In fact, share one story with you. I was in a field like this one day, and I get a call on the radio, you need to talk to Bob. And I said, who's Bob? And he said, well, he'll be at the airplane in about 5 minutes. Okay, so I'm out at the airplane. This guy walks up and says, hi, I'm Bob. Hey, Bob, I'm Darrel. How you doing? What's going on? He said, I need you to do something for me. Okay? And he hands me this box, and in this box are a bunch of leaflets. And I said, what is this? He says, I want you to fly over this little village right here, and I want you to throw these out the window. It's leaflets of some kind, okay? Propaganda, psyops, whatever. Okay, so I get the box, and I put it behind me in the back seat. I'm by myself that day, and I'm flying out over the location there, the village, and I'm reaching back. I got the windows open. I'm reaching back, and I'm grabbing a bunch of these, and I'm throwing them out the window like this. And now the box is empty, and I notice, I can see on the ground that the individuals that are down there are obviously getting the message because they're all firing their rifles. So it's time to leave. So I push the throttle forward, and I pull back on the stick, and nothing happens. What? I look back at my elevator, and it's covered with leaflets. Holy shit. Okay, so I'm thinking, well, I got to go back and land, right? And I got to get over those mountains. And I'm slipping and doing power settings and trying to figure out how I can maneuver this airplane. And then I remembered what some old O1 pilot had told me. He said, if you get stuck like that and the elevator's not working properly, you can always use reverse trim as a little mini elevator on the tail. And so I did that, and by God, it worked. Because the elevator's on the other side, on this side. And it worked, and it got me back into my base. And so I one night live right there. And there were a lot of missions like that. We had to improvise and do what we had to do to support our allied forces up there in that area. And like I say, there were a lot of heavy fights that took place in those days.
Darrel, how about worst mission?
Worst,
most dangerous, most where the pucker packer was way up.
Well, I was up one day and I got one of those inevitable calls. Any Raven, monitoring this frequency. I need your help. So I sauntered over there, and I was my instructions were, can you hurry over to this location? And my answer was, no, you don't hurry in an 01. Come on, give me a break. I'll get there when I get there. We'd be doing 80, 85 knots, something like that. Maybe 100 knots if you're going downhill. But anyway, so I get over there, and I got a ground team. They're walking up a valley, and there's an ambush out in front of them. And the ground commander saw it developing, so he wanted me to come in there and see it and capture and see it, break it up. So I get over them, and I look down, and I can see the enemy was building what they call the classic X across the trail. So they got gun pits firing over. And I said, have your lead man give me a mirror flash right now. And I see a mirror flash, and I said, that's your front guy, right? I said, 120 meters north of you, they're setting up for you right now, and I can see they got heavy machine guns, and this is going to get ugly. He said, well, what can you do for us? So I called for an airstrike. Nothing was immediately available, but I could get some artillery in there, but you can only bring the artillery in so close. And once I did that, then the enemy figured out what I was doing, because usually they wouldn't mess with you unless you started messing with them. And then they all started shooting me, and I could hear the rounds hitting the airplane. One round came through the right door, right there, went right by my arm and went through the back seat right there. Right there, okay? Hold that thought, okay? So I'm doing my thing, and all of a sudden, I begin to notice that my engine's running rough. Oh, gee, this is not good. So I look up there, and my cylinder head temperature is over here, and my oil pressure is over here. That's a bad combination, okay? And then the engine quit. So now I'm flying a glider, okay? Fortunately for me, I was high enough and not too far from that base there at Long Chen that I just showed you that I was able to glide down over the mountain and get into my airfield and landed. So I was okay, but I had a serious pucker factor issue that day. Now, there's a little bit more to the story. When I got on the ground, all my Raven buddies and all the Hmong pilots came around. Oh, 2-5, what happened to you, 2-5? And I'm telling them the story. And then one of the guys looks in the back seat, and he sees that bullet hole. And his voice goes way up here, and he's sticking his finger through the bullet hole like this. And then all the other guys came around. Same thing. They're all sticking their finger through this bullet hole. And finally, one of the guys said, 2-5. We want to fly with you, 2-5. And I said, why? You're very lucky, very lucky. Nobody there, you take bullet. We want to fly with you. Figure that one out. So that was probably, now I'll tell you, we still have time? We're good?
Yeah,
okay.
we're getting there.
Okay,
yeah.
Okay. Another amazing airstrike one day. The biggest danger to our ground forces were North Vietnamese long-range artillery cannons, 130 millimeter guns. And so for us, that was priority number one. So whenever we were flying out there, all of the Ravens would monitor the same Fox Mike radio. And anybody who saw a muzzle flash from a 130 millimeter gun, he owned that target, and his instructions were stay eyes on, go and find it and kill it, okay? Now, the thing about those guns were the North Vietnamese were masters at camouflage, okay? But they never covered their tracks. And heavy trucks and heavy machinery make big tracks, right? And you could follow them right up through the woods, and all of a sudden they would stop, and probably within about 50 feet, there's a gun there, okay? So I go over and I do this, and then I see the gun fire. I own it. I get over there, and then our rule was the next set of fighters that come in, you own it, and you put them on there. So I fly over to the target, and I can see what grove he's in. I had some F-4s with Mark 82s. They dropped the bombs, blew off all the trees, and there's the gun. It's shaped like a perfect Y. You could see the stand there, and then the barrel pointing to the south. And I had him right there. And I called up to our airborne agency, control agency called Cricket. I said, I got a 130 millimeter field gun. and we need to kill this thing. And he says, well, I got 2 F-4s inbound. Flight lead has a laser designator, and number 2 has 2 Mark 84 2,000-pound laser-guided bombs. Would you like to have them? Yeah, I'll take them. Yeah, bring them over here. So these guys check in. I talk them into the target, generally mark the target. The flight lead says, I got the gun, I'm lasing the gun. And I say, okay, you're cleared hot. So I'm doing my thing, and I'll never forget, the one dropping the bomb came right along here, and he drops the laser-guided bomb, and the laser-guided bomb now is going to go to the reflection of the laser on the gun. It's a precision weapon, right? So it's guided. So as the bomb comes off, it's wobulating like this, but it's going to go down there and hit that gun, okay? So I'm watching, I got my binoculars on the gun because I'm up in the northern part of the PDJ where you had to be a lot higher because of the guns. And I watch the bomb come down, and the bomb hits, and the bomb does not detonate. That happens sometimes. But when the bomb hit, it physically hit that gun, okay? And just ripped the shit out of it. Man, it was boom, big pieces flying around. And I said, great shot, lead, you killed it. And he said, what are you talking about? The bomb didn't go off. I said, the bomb didn't have to go off. That 2,000-pound projectile just assholed that gun. It's kill. It's a kill. He says, are you giving me credit? I said, are you going to argue with me? I mean, what's going on here? So that really taught me the value and importance of precision weapons. And, of course, today, with Nate and his guys, that's what they do all the time. You know, they're all about using precision weapons and getting to the right place, getting the right target at the right time. In fact, I might make a little note about Nate. His father-in-law was a guy by the name of John Flanagan. John Flanagan was a dear friend of mine, earlier 1962 graduate of the Air Force Academy who flew tours in 01 and wrote a very spectacular book called Vietnam Above the Treetops. Probably the finest 01 type book that I've ever seen or read. So.
All right, Darrel, we got 5. Then we're going to turn it over to Nate. So go ahead.
Okay. So give me my next slide, please. Let's see what we got. Okay, there's an 01 in flight, and again, you can't quite see it, but the roundel on the side there would change constantly. And like I say, the South Vietnamese, the Thais, the Cambodians, the South Koreans, the Aussies, everybody was flying 01s over there during the war. Next slide. And this is a road. This is a road cut. We went up there, the Ho Chi Minh Trail, and all those roads that the North Vietnamese used. We would do everything we could to try to find the trucks in the open and destroy them, or in many cases just destroy the road to block them up, right? And we would go in there and we would pound these areas day after day after day and just create these big mud holes. A lot of it was very ineffective, though, and I learned something very, very simple truth in doing all that. It's very, very hard to destroy a dirt road. Think about that. Yeah, and we tried. We dropped 2 million tons of bombs on Laos during the war. Okay, here's a picture looking out of my wing. There's an A7 right in the middle of that, camouflaged. Very difficult at times to see, and we had a lot of trouble working the Air Force A7s in part because of that. And there's another long story there I wish I could tell you. But this is what it looked like working up over the plain of jars. You can see the road there a little bit. And that was our playground. Next slide, please. There we go. Here, what you're looking at, we're taking in a group of commando forces, guerrilla types. We're going to insert them along various hide sites along the Ho Chi Minh Trail. We're carrying them in with helicopters there. We did a lot of that. A lot of my primary missions were capping those guys. I would fly above with airstrikes ready to go, and I'm the command and control node that can bring it all together if necessary. Next slide. Okay, here we go. Go back one. Okay, here we go. Classic search and rescue operation. We have, in this case, this is a portrait that was painted a few years ago of USA-1. It has the belly land on the plain of jars there. You can see some of the jars actually over on the right side there. In to rescue him, we have an Air America helicopter comes in. His call sign was Hotel 16, and you can see that on the tail. And up above, in the right corner, we've got a Laotian T-28 there firing rockets at the bad guys. And in the background, you can't quite see it, but there's a Raven up top maestroing this entire operation. And that was something that we did with some regularity. Next slide. The F-4. We worked a lot of F-4s while we were over there. This is one of our primary support aircraft. This particular aircraft is carrying 12 Mark 82s. The ones on the outside have the daisy cutters, and I see over here on this A1, see? Those bombs that he's got with the fuses sticking out, those are daisy cutters designed so that when the bomb would hit the ground, it would go off and give you a larger frag pattern instead of digging into the dirt and digging up a bunch of dust. Just something that we did. He also has, right under his intake there, he has an electronic jamming pod for SA-2 radar-controlled missiles. That was becoming a big threat in those days. Yeah. Next slide. Okay. Now, here's something I just found the other day. This is an improvisation. Somebody took an O-1 there and turned it into a gunship by hanging an M60 out the left window. Okay, go for it. I fired my rifle a few times out of the window. I don't know what for. I don't know if I did. But some guys would do stuff like that. And here's another shot. Next slide, please. This is a Marine OE-1 landing aboard a carrier. And I guess the Marines did some of this kind of stuff at the beginning of the war. And more power to them if they can do that. That's great. And next slide. Okay. This is one of my Laotian pilots. This is Zhang Litu. He's flying one of our airplanes. You can see the Laotian roundels on the side there. You can see the rockets on the wings. Zhang Litu was one of many Hmong and Laotians that we trained to fly airplanes. And when we'd bring these young guys in to go to our flight school, which was up in northern Thailand there, first thing was from what I understand, I wasn't part of this, but I've heard the briefings. The first thing they would do was teach them how to ride a bicycle, okay? Because they came from an animist background. They thought that electric lights were magic. You know, they were that far behind. I mean, after all, Laos was a country that was rushing headlong into the 17th century. Very primitive. And then they'd put them in cars, teach them how to drive cars, and then they would take them to the airplanes. And once they got it, they were damn fine pilots. And Zhang Litu was one of our main guys there. We checked him out as a T-28 flight lead, and he also served as a FAC himself. And this is my last photo here. This is me and him. He and I were very special friends, and after I left, about a year later, unfortunately, he was killed, shot down, because even though we came home from the war didn't stop, not even in Laos. And a year later, he was still fighting, and he was killed. And he's kind of a special guy, and I have to say, quite honestly, that the reason that I am here today, because of that man right there. Okay?
Thank you, Darrel. We'll open up to questions afterwards, but right now, and I won't give a long introduction at all, but what we've got is this youngster here, Nate Scopak, Colonel, current United States Air Force, Hurlbut Field. He's a group commander down there, been in special ops his entire career. I know he's got a lot of MC-130 time, gunships, and I got to be honest with you, I looked up some of the other airplanes that he flew. I saw the designations, and I looked and I went, wow, I didn't know that we were flying those things. So he's going to kind of bring you up to date. He's got some slides, after which, hey, we're going to cut it off, and then we're going to open up for questions. So, Colonel, you got it.
Thanks, Ed. Thanks, gentlemen. Thank you for everything you've done. So the one thing that I took out of that presentation is humans are more important than hardware. I'll say that again. Humans are more important than hardware. And I'll let you in on a not-so-secret secret. That is the first Special Operations Force truth. There's 5 of them, but that's the first one. And the one thing that I will say is, so I've been in AFSOC, Air Force Special Operations Command, since 1999. Deployed numerous times, both Afghanistan and Iraq. Had the pleasure of commanding both at the squadron level and at the wing level in Afghanistan. And that is something that we have really inculcated in ourselves, as humans are more important than hardware. And it all came from the sacrifice and from the belief system that was set up by our forefathers in Vietnam. So if you can go to my first slide, please. As Darrel said, 1966, my stepfather, John Flanagan, was flying O-1 Birddogs. That became my connection to the Birddog. And flew as a Project Delta FAC. He was there for about 8 months with Project Delta of his full year there. Project Delta was the precursor to some of the very elite special operations forces we have today. So I kind of grew up hearing about that. And if you see in the middle lower picture, that's my academy roommate, Chris, John, and myself standing in front of an F4. My roommate, Chris, was flying QF4s at Tyndall at the time. John came up and was lucky enough to go get a flight with those guys, which was fantastic. Again, talk about a connection between the Vietnam War and the present day. And now, upper right-hand corner, that's John and his ROMAD. ROMAD was the radio operator, enlisted radio operator, which you can really think of as the predecessor to today's TACPs, who also are in enlisted career field, who are running airstrikes and the JTACs. And then the lower right-hand corner, to show that bond, as we said, my stepfather passed away in 2012. The gentleman on the left in the Army uniform is Street St. Laurent. Street was one of the Project Delta team sergeants. So he came all the way up and presented my mom and me with a Project Delta flag, which up until last week I had hanging in my office. I actually just gave up command of my group last week. So that connection just goes all the way through the years, and it defines the kind of special operator I became, and I think it defines the kind of special operations force we have in the Air Force today. Next slide, please. Okay, so Iraq 03 to 2010. So this was my first taste of combat, okay? I missed the early push to Afghanistan, do some training, but I picked up right up on the backside of Iraq. And you can see my crew in the lower left-hand corner. I deployed about 4 or 5 different times to Iraq, so I had different crews each time. But the important part I want to show you is, you look at a mixed crew here. These are great Americans who are ready to go sacrifice in a foreign country. That bond is the same, and it will always be the same. And that's the wonderful part about being America. It's me flying out on a mission. You see my NVGs there. It's end of a long night. We would always fly nights. And in fact, when I first started flying, we needed to get a waiver to land during the day coming into Iraq, basically because of the threat. So we'd fly all night long on NVGs, 5, 6, 7, 8 hours, and then land at the end of a long night. And then go back to my slide, please. You can just leave it up. I wanted to show upper right-hand corner. That's our chaplain, okay? And I'm not going to go in depth on that, but the fact that we provide a combat chaplain to our special operations forces and to all of our American forces, I think is important because there is a spiritual part of combat. And, combat is definitely the point where you realize where the rubber meets the road. And then down low, that's myself and a loadmaster getting ready to do an airdrop in Iraq. And the one thing, as I said before, humans more important than hardware. The common bond we have is we are always, specifically in AFSOC, and I would say writ large in the Air Force, looking to support the guys on the ground to accomplish the mission, okay? That's our job. So in this particular situation, that was me going ahead and doing an airdrop, resupply airdrop. I had a couple of opportunities where I did emergency resupply airdrops where we would come back from a long mission of just hauling cargo throughout Iraq, only to be told, hey, a team was in the deep stuff, and they needed some support, and they needed some water, some ammunition, some MREs, some whatever it was. Can your crew fly? And we had just flown all that time. Our crew day was probably a little bit skosh, for those of you who don't understand. So in the Air Force, we have, at least right now, we have a certain number of hours that we can fly tactical events. And we were typically on the tail end of that because that started when you showed up to fly, right? Well, you could be a little bit, mushy with when did I show up to fly when I stepped on the airplane? Did I show up to fly when I stepped with my crew and did my crew brief? Did I show up to fly when I stepped to go get, lunch before I left? It depends what's going on. So in that kind of situations, yeah, you're damn right. It was when I stepped on the airplane, so we could go ahead and get these missions done. And so that's the sort of things that we're doing today. It was never unsafe, and it was never something that we didn't thoroughly talk about with leadership. But we had to be very specific as to what we were getting done so we could support the troops. I'm going to tell you about one mission that I had that I learned a lot in Iraq, and then we'll talk about Afghanistan. So, and this is actually a personal failure to me. So we were flying up, very simple mission. I was supporting some helicopters. The MC-130 that I fly can both do airdrops, but it can also refuel helicopters in flight, right? And so I knew we had to support these helicopters later in the night, so we did a couple of cargo drops while they were doing their mission. And their mission was to drop a team off, and then logger, which basically means orbit, and then come back down and pick the team up to get them out after doing whatever it was they were doing. So we got the call, hey, we need gas. I said, okay, we can come find you. We'll set up our normal setup. So we went to try to find these helicopters. And they said, hey, I said, where are you guys? And they gave us a point. And lead and number 2 were split by a decent amount of distance. So after some searching, some coordination, we finally figured out where lead was. And we came over, and we came over the top of them. We have hoses to refuel our helicopters. So the hoses were extended. They came out. Lead helicopter came in, plugged, and I'm just dragging him along in an orbit over Iraq, over hostile territory. And he just needs a lot of gas. And it's hot, it's dry, humid, dry climate, but it's hot, and so he's got very low performance. So I'm sitting here, my minimum operating speed at this point is about 105 knots. And I'll tell you, I saw about 101 in the airspeed indicator. So if you fly in a C-130 at Birddog speeds, it gets interesting. So got him his gas. He come off the hose. He said, thank you. We would not have had enough gas to get home if you hadn't gotten us. I said, okay, well, let's go get your number 2. So then and this is where the failure comes in. I'm trying to find number 2, and I just can't find him. And he's radioing, and he's saying, hey, I'm off of this radial of this position. And I go to my navigator, I said, do you have any idea what that position is? And we couldn't figure it out. And we just could not find this guy. And so finally, and he was driving towards his divert field base, and finally he said, hey, I'm at my base, I'm gonna stop and get gas. So he had to land, he had to shut down, he had to get his fuel, and crank back up again and go. So all was good, except for the fact that the ground team had to be on the ground for an extra half an hour because we couldn't get our mission done. And I'll tell you what, that was one of the biggest failures I have had in my flying career. And it was all because I didn't know the position that they were talking about, the common reference point, I didn't know what it was. So I learned real quick, make sure you get good and close with your helicopter friends, make sure you get good and close with your ground friends, and make sure you're all talking the same language. Because if you're not talking the same language, bad things happen. All right, next slide, please. Okay, so this is me in Afghanistan. Like I said, I had good opportunity there. I commanded twice in Afghanistan, and it was fantastic, as well as flying missions. Our crews, you can see the various crew shots. The gentleman in the lower left-hand corner is actually here out somewhere in Oshkosh with me this week. He was my co-pilot when I was a brand new navigator as a lieutenant, and then I went to pilot training and came back. So here we are, 15 years later from that point, fast friends meeting in Afghanistan. And then here we are today, 25 years later, 24 years later, and we're still great friends. So that's the kind of bond that you form in combat. But then in the lower right-hand corner, you see another airdrop getting ready. That's a mission that was a success story. That was a mission where in Afghanistan, the Marines were coming to take Marja. Okay, Marja was a small town in the southwest of Afghanistan. That offensive was moving a lot faster than anybody expected, which was fantastic, except they had outrun their supply chain. So I had come in, finished flying a long, just cargo hauling mission, hadn't planned on doing any kind of resupply, landed, and the mission commander called me up and said, hey, we need you to go resupply these guys. They're out farther ahead of their water, they're farther ahead of their food, they're farther ahead of their ammo. They need some resupply. And unfortunately, we know that there's a bunch of AAA out there, but we don't know where it is. So I sent my enlisted guys out to the plane, get the plane ready. The navigators and I, my co-pilot, sat down and planned the whole thing out, got out to the plane, took off. En route, we briefed the crew. We said, all right, this is what we got to do, this is where we're going to drop, everything like that. As we were walking out to the airplane, our mission commander huddled all our crew together. And for the first time ever, she kind of brought us together. She kind of said a quick prayer, and she said, notice I'm saying she. My mission commander was a fantastic female AFSOC lieutenant colonel, retired colonel. She said, hey, we don't know what's out there, so be careful. We got out there. We had gunships overhead. We had A-10s also orbiting. We checked in with both of those guys, came in. The weather was skosh coming down, but once we got underneath the cloud deck, again, under my NVG, it's clear as a million. Drove up, found the drop zone, dropped within about 125 yards of their position, peeled off, came in. Never got shot at, never saw anything, which was fantastic. But we got word from the next guy that, yeah, hey, whoever dropped that stuff was great. It was right outside where we were, and we were absolutely down to zero on our supply, so thank you. So that's the kind of camaraderie, that's the kind of connection you get to people when you're in combat. Now my final slide, next slide. All right, so this is a picture I just gave up my group about a week ago. This is my son and I in front of an 01 at Hurlburt Field, just to say that the future is strong. Americans today are an amazing group. And, people say we had the greatest generation in World War II. I will tell you, the greatest generation continues to be ahead of us. So we are an amazing group. So I'm just happy to be here. Thank all of you for all the wonderful things you did.
Nate, I want to first say thank you for a great career. 20, how many years?
24.
24 years, and you'll be out here shortly. And I'm sure you'll do well on the outside world. But thank you so much for, the present day stuff. And I'll open it up to questions now for everybody involved here. There's going to be some mics thrown around there we go. We got some mics. So if y'all have got questions for anybody, the current day, for the old guys like us with Darrel, for the 01s, after we shut this down, we're going to be hanging around some more. And I will also mention that Darrel is an accomplished author, as you saw up there. His latest book is Moral Imperative. He'll be back there later to autograph the books. But for right now, I'm just going to open it up to some questions. So let's see. Here we go. First one right there.
This one's for Mike. And Mike, could you discuss a little bit about the takeoff and landings as far as the distances that the O1's capable of?
Yeah, be glad to. This aircraft at gross weight, off the ground and over the 50-foot obstacle, in right around 300 to 400 feet. Down and stopped over the same high obstacle in about the same. So this aircraft can literally operate darn near anywhere.
And it's got an IO-470 in it, is that right?
Yeah, an old 0470 in it, yes.
Okay. Okay. Next, any other questions? Oh, we got another one up there.
How many of the O1s were shot down? It looks like at those speeds, anybody with a slingshot could take you out.
How many were shot down?
How many were shot down?
I saw something not all that long ago through the internet, and I saw somewhere, just Vietnam, Southeast Asia alone, upwards of between 11 and 1,700.
Yeah, I would believe that, yeah.
Yeah, and they only built a little over 3,400 of them.
Yeah.
What were the loss rates?
Well, yeah, how about...
Well, I don't honestly know, but I'll give you this one data point. Of the 6 guys that I went up with up there in my 6 months with the Ravens, 4 of us were shot down at least once. 2 guys were shot down twice. I do know that 2 of those guys died. It was a high risk program. There's no doubt about it. And again, I don't have the official numbers, but up there, and of course there were no prisoners. If you went down, that was over, and because again we weren't supposed to be there. And as it turns out, during the war, we had hundreds of aircraft shot down in Laos writ large. And at the end, when we brought all the POWs back, there were only 9 guys who came out of Laos. And so we just kind of understood that this was high risk. Can I share another war story, Ed?
You bet.
Let me this is in honor of one of my Raven buddies. Guy by the name is Steve Neal. Steve was the Texas guy, built like a fire plug, a big, broad linebacker kind of shoulders, and no neck. He didn't have a neck. It just went from chest to chin. And Steve was up there as one of our Ravens, and he's out on a mission one day, and he gets a call on the radio. Hey, very bad situation, need Raven. So he goes over to where these guys are, and he finds the team, and he's got a Hmong in the back seat. And so the backseater's talking to the guy, and he's telling him about how they were going forward, and the same thing, they get ambushed, they need air power right now. Okay, so Steve calls up to our command post in the sky, and they got a couple of F4s, they divert down to him, and they're going to do their thing out there. And Steve briefs them up and shows them where the friendlies are, and of course the fighters got visual contact with Steve, so we not going to bump airplanes and everything. And of course, the ground commander's increasingly more urgent because they're in this big fight now. And so Steve says, okay, lead. He says, I'm going to mark the target for you now. So Steve rolls in, And he had a habit of making real steep dives in the 01. And he fires this rocket and he pulls up and he gets right about here. And at that exact moment, God decides that the 2 bolts holding his seat to the floor in the front are going to release. And they do. And he rotates into the back seat. Now he's like this in the airplane, right? And of course the Hmong in the back seat going, Steve, what you do? What you do? And his feet, he's got the windows open. Both of his feet go out the windows, maps, everything's out the windows. And the airplane gets up about here. He's got full power on the airplane. He's got the stick all the way back into his belly. And the predictable happens. He kind of falls off and starts into a spin. That's not good. So Steve does his thing, gets control of the airplane, fights it back under control, gets out of the spin, gets the airplane level. Of course, all the bad guys are shooting at him down below. They thought it was hilarious, probably. I don't know. Anyway, so he gets the airplane under control. Now he's got another problem. Because the number one thing about tactical air flying, and you'll all identify with this, is whatever is happening at the moment, you've got to sound cool on the radio. And Steve allowed us at the time, he was a little upset. So he told us later on, he said, I took a little extra time to climb out because it settled the voice. Okay. So finally he gets back up to altitude. Fighters are watching, waiting, doing their thing. Ground commander screaming his heart out, get this thing in going, let's go. So Steve says, okay, lead, you got the target in sight? Yeah. Said, you cleared in hot. I'll tell you what, Vac, I'd like to have another mark. Steve says, well, wait a minute. Now he's confused. You just told me that you got the target in sight. He goes, Raven, he says, we got you in sight. We got the friendlies in sight. We got the bad guys in sight. We just want to see that rocket pass again. That's a true story. To Steve Neal, God bless him.
I love it. All right, we got one up top there. Go ahead.
I guess this is a Raven question.
Okay.
So did you fly with cameras like the KA-39s, and what about dropping ground sensors, that kind of thing on the Ho Chi Minh?
I never flew the 01 over the Ho Chi Minh Trail. I was in the war further to the north. However, we had the supply roads coming in from North Vietnam to the east of us, places called Ban Ban and Sam Nua. I flew those roads, and I showed you that picture of that. But I never dropped the sensor loads, but I know what you're talking about. But many occasions, same thing. Some guy would walk up to my airplane and, hey, I'm George. Hi, George. How you doing? What do you need? Take this camera here and go out and get some pictures for us. And I said, who's us? He says, I'll meet you when you get back. There was a lot of that kind of stuff up there in the war because a lot of our governmental agencies were involved in that. You know, like I say, you had Air America doing their thing. They're on contract to the State Department, so they're up there. We're all working ultimately for the ambassador anyhow. He was our boss, as opposed to whether it was a colonel working for the ambassador who was directly my boss. But we were all working for the ambassador. He was running the war, and all kinds of those things were going on all the time. And so, yeah, I took lots of pictures of lots of things. Whatever happened to them, they're not on my computer.
Yeah,
and of course, you know who's doing that now.
The KA-39s. We used to carry KA-39s on the right wing, which is a big.
Oh
thing
yeah.
like
Oh,
this.
you mean actually mounted on the wings?
Mounted where the rockets are.
Wow,
and
interesting.
The only downside was that you had to fly for 4 hours with full left rudder.
Holy cow! And who are you flying for?
I was flying Cat Killers, 220th Reconnaissance Airplane.
There you go. God bless you for your service, sir.
Thank you.
Hoorah.
All right, anybody else? All right, with that, oh, we got one down in front here. Anybody, yeah, Bruce can give you a mic. And I see Connie, she's about to give us the hook here, I think.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your
You're doing
service.
great.
And question about aiming the rockets and their accuracy.
Yeah. Okay. Well, we didn't have a gun sight. You know, I flew A-10s later on, and it'd tell you anything you wanted to know, you know. But there it was, I think it was 2 knuckles up, and you put a little grease pencil mark, and then you would approximate from there. Everybody had their own thing. Steve Neal made his passes at 60 degrees. I made mine at 25 to 30. But again, it was totally situationally dependent, and the idea is not necessarily to hit the target on the ground, but to mark the target on the ground. So you put the mark down, that's your referential discussion point. Lead, okay, you see the river next to that? Okay, cross the river, there, and you became very creative in doing that. Now, having said that, there were times when the weather was really bad, maybe 500-600 foot ceiling, and our guys are having trouble with bad guys. We can't get the fighters in to do that kind of stuff. Maybe call some F-111s to do some sky pukes or something like that. But we would take the rails and load them up with high explosive or anti-tank rounds like that and go out and do our own close air support. You know, we did everything we could to try to support. So it's like Nate said, you know, you're all one team over there fighting together, and we would do everything we could to support those teams on the ground, because that's why we were there.
But I can add to that too. I shot a lot of rockets out of the O2, and yeah, we had they called it a gun sight, but it wasn't very worthwhile. But I learned at a very, very early point that, hey, if that rocket hits and it's still burning when it hits the ground, you don't have to worry about the drop very much, you know? And so, of course, you know, I'm doing this in peacetime, but when I go to the gunnery range, it's like, hey, I'm going to win this thing no sweat, because, hey, my rockets aren't going to drop. I'm going to sit there and press in as close as I can so that when that rocket hits, I've watched the motor still burning when it hits the ground, you know? And yeah, it was a shack, you know, and so I won the quarter. So.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Questions?
One more war story.
Go ahead.
One more war story.
All right. That's what you're here for.
Okay. So this is when I was flying OV-10s, right? And, man, I want to tell you, when I was flying the OV-10, I was somebody, man, because that was a cool airplane with a cool mission. And I take off one day, and I'm going from NKP over to Da Nang, and I'm flying across the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And I look down on the ground, and here's this truck in the middle of the day. He's driving down the road. I said, I can't allow this, you know? So I got a pot of rockets on there, you know, and I'm going to get this guy. So I roll in, fire a rocket, and get him to stop. And I kind of halfway noticed that he was towing something. No problem, man. So I come around, and I'm setting up, and I'm going to nail this guy, and I'm rolling in, and I'm tracking. And all of a sudden, I discovered what he was carrying. He was towing a 23-millimeter gun, and those shells were going right by me like this. I broke out of there. I didn't take any hits, and he chased me out of the valley, and rightly so, man. Yeah, 23 millimeter is a very dangerous one. Yeah.
All right, gentlemen, I say thank you. Darrel, thank you for your service.
My pleasure. God bless you
bravery.
all. Thank you very much, folks. Enjoy the air show.
Nate, Jim, Mike, thank you very much. We'll cut it off, and like I said, if you got questions, you want to walk around the airplanes, please feel free.
Oh, great
thank
stuff.
you very
Nate,
much for being
it's a
here.
pleasure to be here with you.